and then what I do is we kind of, you gotta promote as well. Anyway, welcome everyone. We just went live. Jacob Ner-David back again with the Virtual for You wine tasting. For today, I am joined by my good friend, colleague, business associate, but good friend, most important, Ron Prashker, who has a very unique identity, and we'll talk about it, and he'll introduce us to one of his wines, because sadly, I do not have those wines accessible to me. I will drink one of my own, but otherwise I would be drinking his wine. I've had it before, and it is quite enjoyable. I was actually just talking, Ron, to another friend of mine today, another vintner, Ellie Wertman, that he needs to go visit your wine.
Definitely. I'm happy to have him. When we can.
Once we're getting on.
Yeah, we should be, Italy, the wineries in Italy, and in Tuscany. Italy is, earlier this week has started their slow rollout. May 4th, I think, was the first day. The winery has been operating in a skeleton crew, of course, keeping the things that need to be kept in the winery, mostly the field, some bottlings, some things in the office. There's been interesting requests here and there from suppliers and people reaching out directly asking for wine, but generally running a skeleton crew. But in the next 2 weeks in Italy, they'll be allowed to open up a little more. And right now, it seems like by the beginning of June, some form of travel and tourism will be allowed, as long as, of course, everything holds up the way they hope. Right. And my partner, our winemaker, our CEO, my co-shareholder, as he says, we're built for this time because, you can't but social distance. We're in the countryside, sit on a beautiful hill overlooking the countryside of Tuscany, mountain air, a winery, there's food, there's wine, and you can sit 6 feet apart, no problem, 2 meters apart, not an issue, and you're not in the hustle and bustle. So he's a very optimistic person to begin with, as you know, you talked to him. Yeah. And he foresees winery and visits and countryside as the big winner of if we can call it that, of COVID in the long term.
Yes, I completely agree. I think the main issue for all of us, right, that cater to a global community, and Italian wine obviously cater to a global community, which is, the tension between, and what we're doing right now, obviously, is an example of that. The tension between physically being able to go to the cantina, be able to go physically to the winery in Tuscany, and experiencing it remotely, which is a good segue to start to open our bottles of wine and let them open up a little bit. Before we get into who you are and how you got to where you are, tell us about the wine you're going to be opening.
So today we're going to open. Sorry, I'm getting my bearings left, right?
Yeah,
today we're going to. I have to get used to that. Today we're going to open our Vino Nobile, as we call it, Nobile. Vino Nobile is the main wine of Montepulciano, the first DOCG wine of Italy back in the early 60s, by the way. Nobile comes from the idea that it was the noble wine. Montepulciano, which was a longtime Florentine bastion within the Siena countryside, was the core winemaking region and school for the Medicis, the Florentine families. And in the 16th century, it was considered the place you'd come to learn to make wine. And that's how it became kind of the name of Nobile. Of course, it helps that when your family also has a few popes in its lineage, you bring wine from there to the popes. And one of the things that often happens with Vino Nobile de Montepulciano is that it's confused with Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. And one of the core stories for that is, and it kind of ties into this Medici idea, is that at some point the Medicis decided to make themselves a small country plot or land, and it was basically the region of what is today known as Abruzzo. So when they decided to get a big plot of land in the south of Italy, they wanted to have their own wine. So they went to Montepulciano and to the winemakers in Montepulciano and said, how do we make wine there? What should we do? And they brought the school and the knowledge and some of the vine cuttings. And that's why in Abruzzo today, you still call wine Montepulciano, because the origin, going back 500-600 years, was from Montepulciano, the region, as the core place. So we're going to open the Vino Nobile. Vino Nobile is our mainline wine. It's our biggest production wine. We have today 4 different types of Vino Nobile. But this is our main Vino Nobile, which is, like I said, the most representative of our vineyards because it comes from the entire property on the Montepulciano estate. It is also what we make the most of. So we want to make sure that we get the most representative wine into the most hands. And that's the idea of the mainline Vino Nobile. It comes from 100% Sangiovese. Everything we do is organic with biodynamic treatments. And it's aged for 18 months in mostly large Slovenian bote, the large Slovenian casks of 8,000 liters, and fermented in there, aged in there. A little bit goes into some tonneau, 500 liters. That is older, so pretty neutral by this stage. Mm-hmm. And then 6 to 12 months of bottle aging. So this wine takes 24 to 36 months to come out. This is actually a 2015, what I have here in New York. The current vintage is 2017, but I don't have any in my confined closet. That is my confined closet. That's called the cellar. Yeah, my version of a cellar. But 2015 was a great year in Tuscany. It was a great year for us. This wine actually received 94 points from Spectator and a few other people. And again, all that is kind of our main wine. We do have a few levels that go up that are Reservas, that are either from older vines or aged longer or in different combination of barrels into some new barrels. But this is our main wine. It's also my favorite wine. It just, like most Italian wines, a great food wine, a great drinking wine that really is so flexible because of the, I would say high acidity, but a little more acid, as is normal with Sangiovese and Italian wines, and is round, nice tannins, great fruit, and really a flexible wine from pizza to a nice steak.
So you're gonna pour your wine because I actually do have some bottles of that. I just don't have them here in Hanaton in my own winery. Long story as to why they're not here, but I do not have them here. I was gifted them by Ron, but I don't have them here. So I'm going to be pouring a very different wine, but for the Israeli wine scene, the modern version, which is the Argaman, which we've tasted before.
Yes.
So I'm going to be pouring myself some of that, and then. I wanted to take you back, right? Because in terms of identity and how you ended up in Tuscany, I have to tell you, by the way, a quick anecdote of Tuscany and wine. People often ask me, what's the best wine you ever tasted? And I said, well, that's a very kind of silly question because it totally depends on so many different things and so many things that are going on. But if you want to know the best wine experience I ever had, to this very day, including my own wines, to this very day, was that many years ago we were on a family vacation in Tuscany, and on the Tuscany-Umbria border, actually. And
right near us.
Yeah, and through a family connection, we ended up staying at the estate of Count Nino, who is officially the Count of Perugia, and by hereditary. And like many people, vast lands, beautiful old homes, but challenged financially to keep it all up. But he grows all of his own, very organic, very early into that, but grows all of his own vegetables and makes obviously his own wine. And so we sat on the veranda of this grand old, and the
edge of the hill.
Edge of the hill, overlooking Lake Passignano over here, and Perugia over there. and drinking Nino's wine, eating Nino's food, which was picked that day, and so on and so forth. That was like for me the ultimate right experience.
Yeah.
And the wine obviously had no name; it was just Nino's wine.
Well, that's the best. It's the same stories, like you said. The people who come back from a trip in Tuscany and say it's the best wine I ever had. And I know you send the wine here that's the bad wine, and you choose the lots of which to send. The answer is simple. It's exactly yours. I put it a little more crudely often, and I'll spare your listeners today. But it's you're in the countryside, you're on vacation, you're having fun, you're eating fresh food, you're sitting on the side of the hill. Wine is always an experience. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's shorter, but overall you want to enjoy the bottle, the wine. It represents a place and a time and a specific situation, even if you're not in that situation. But if you're in that situation, many more times do you really get that whole opportunity to take it all in, and it's exactly what you're saying.
So I'm not going to go into your whole life story. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I am going to ask you your journey to Italian wine. How did that specific journey happen? In terms of,
well, the specific journey is very, again, goes back, like you're saying, to other things, but the short of it is I loved food. I took some culinary classes, and then I started loving wine, and I took wine and spirit education trust classes and started getting more and more into wine and learning more about it. And at some point, while doing technology, like all of us, I said, I want to try to figure out how to combine a few things or try to do something else. And I started really wanting to figure out how to make an investment in wine. We're talking about mid 2000s. And my idea was actually, since I know I sound like I'm completely American and I live here in New York at the moment, but I'm also Israeli. My family lives in Israel, was to figure out a way to combine and be able to come back to Israel. And I thought I'd do something in Israel. And I started researching and putting together a consulting project of my own for myself. I met with countless people, including you, I think, back at the time, and just started to learn. And while that process was happening, I was approached by a friend of mine here in New York who happened to know some people in Italy. And he said, you should talk to these people. They're not seeking investment, not anything, but they're nice guys and they're like you. One was a consultant too at some point, and one was in technology at some point. And you should talk to them. They're interesting guys, and you should get to know them. Maybe they have something to enlighten you.
Before that conversation happened, how much experience had you had specifically getting to know Italian wine, even through the WSEC courses and so on? Like, did you have a specific?
Well,
already tuned into, or it could have been.
Not in particular. I wouldn't say that I had a specific, but through WSET, like you're saying, of course, there's a good emphasis on Italian wine as much as almost anywhere else, probably other than France. And I had been to Tuscany. Oddly enough, my life seems to kind of revert back to Florence and Tuscany in a way, because I got married in Florence at the big synagogue in Florence back in the day. Again, completely random, just because my wife and I, who we've been together and known each other since high school, more or less, decided at some point that we actually really should get married. And we didn't want to bring everyone out to New York. We didn't want to bring everyone out to Tel Aviv, and we didn't want a big wedding. So to combat the Israel aspect of having to probably have the feeling that you should have 500 people at your wedding, and otherwise bringing everyone out to New York, we said, let's get married somewhere, invite 50 people and see who shows up. And that's how we did it. Literally within 3 months, threw it together, and it was a great wedding and great fun. But and we went to wine tasting during that week too, and so I've been to wine tastings out in Tuscany, but I wasn't attuned specifically to wine tasting. I think having that experience and some affinity to knowing a little bit of the places and having a very strong emotional connection to Tuscany made me more interested in Tuscany when somebody brought it up. But I didn't go out seeking, and I didn't have any specific dots on the map.
You weren't an Italian wine freak.
No,
you were interested in wine, obviously.
I was interested in wine. I was interested in both the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. That after a certain time, by the way, I forgot, but talking about your previous guest, Jeff Morgan, who I consider more or less my mentor in winemaking. The very short stint I took of learning how to winemake and the business of wine from the American perspective out in Napa. I took a course from Jeff in 2006, I believe, or 6, I think, through the CIA, through the Culinary Institute of America. Jeff taught a few courses there. I learned the basics of winemaking and the basics of the wine business. And that was already when I had decided that I want to do something. So I figured I need to get a little more understanding of the wine appreciation, which is the WSET, and more the wine production from Jeff and the CIA. But no specific Italian, other than obviously it's beautiful, it's known. And from a business perspective, obviously perceived to be easier than Israeli wines, though I think that there really is no easy in the wine business, which a lot of people told me, but you really only learn that once you really get into it.
So we both know startups, in
exactly.
general, they're never easy, no matter what anybody says. There is no easy route. Yeah, take a drink. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Clink your screen. That's where you do it in the virtual tasting. Clink your screen. We already have a question that's come in from Michael Blatt. So I'm just going to read you the question because you can't see it.
I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, I flashed it just for a minute there for you to see it. But so first of all, thanks to Michael and his company, which is Vingard Valise, for coming in for the last session we did, and they actually did. They offered to give a free suitcase to one of our listeners and viewers, and that viewer was David Isaac. I'm just gonna after this write it up. Who was randomly chosen from a lot of people who wrote in to get the free suitcase. So it's a hopeful sign, by the way, in terms of this whole conversation we're having with Michael somewhere in the Northeast, Vermont, you in New York, me in Israel, talking about an Italian winery. We will need wine suitcases.
We can move the conversation to Hebrew too, if you want.
but that we're going to need wine suitcases once again.
Exactly.
To travel with our wine. So, but Michael's question for you is, he said that recently they did a wine and cooking event with some friends, and the theme was acidity. We did a Cali Sauvignon Blanc and a Rosso di Montepulciano pairing with homemade pesto and marinara pasta. Now I'm hungry. That was my editorial comment, and now I'm hungry. Do you find that the word acidity comes across in a positive light? And how would you describe that word as it relates to the good part of your wine? And then a side note from Michael is that he and his wife were married at a small vineyard in San Cassiano, Val di Pesa. So,
very close. Yeah.
Yeah. Acidity.
So I think there's no good answer. And I think just like with so much with wine, that is a culturally relative term, the acidity. And I'll explain what I mean. I think it depends who you ask where, if acidity is a negative or positive. I could tell you that, and again, I think it's changing. And I don't want to get into discussions of Parkerization versus other people, but that's kind of how it has to be couched, I think, a little way. For Italians, I will tell you acidity is a good term. And I'll do it short. And for Americans, I don't know about Canadians, but for Americans, I think acidity, maybe it's not a negative term. It's surely not positive. Maybe it's neutral, but I would say it probably tends to be more in the negative to neutral. And I don't think that's because it inherently is. I think that is more from a misconception of what it actually means. And that kind of goes into the second aspect of it. I think there's an association, or maybe more, I think it's correct to say, a confusion more by Americans between tannin and acidity, and and that's always a problem for many people. It's just that there's so much discussion in the U.S. and with Americans, and about tannin and the fact that tannins are inherently in California wine softer and less pronounced, that there's a confusion of which one is which. And in the US, acidity is often confused with tannins, and sometimes vice versa, though. It's usually people take tannins to be acidity and not acidity to be tannin. Right. And I think that's why there's maybe a little more negative. And the Italians, they're more used to higher acid in general, and so therefore the tannins aren't as pronounced even when they are not as soft. So I think that's that. And in our case, acidity and Sangiovese especially, that association that so many people have with Sangiovese and it's somewhat the acidity is that sour, that border sour red cherry flavor that is so common in many Sangioveses. We have it too. We have, it depends again on how old the vines. Here we have kind of a red, less sour cherry, more red, but not super uber Marciano kind of sweet cherry. And that's really where the acidity in Sangiovese is often kind of goes to for in your flavor profile, to that sour cherry, bright red cherry flavor. And the great thing about acidity and the great thing about Sangiovese is that it really helps carry so many foods. And that's when I was talking about the flexibility of the wine. It helps with a lot of things, from a very fatty steak to a very, tomatoey pizza or pasta, like Michael mentioned. So I think that's kind of how you take it in our case, to be that kind of bright cherry, bright currant flavor.
And then when you're, something else that I know about you, which is that you actually moved to Italy. You lived there for a number of years, and then you went to the States. You could say went back to the States, but you've been bopping about the world for many years. So then you went to the States, and you actually built up a lot of the distribution for your wine in the States. What was the most challenging thing that you experienced when you went back to the States and started marketing the wine?
So I didn't. It's correct to say that we rebuilt the distribution. So we did have distribution before. No, because we made a big change, and that's part of the plan. So we went back when I moved to Italy for 2 years. We in 2009 started implementing a new turnaround business plan for the winery. The winery existed, but we rebuilt the business both conceptually, meaning brand, image, marketing ideas, and physically, meaning a new cellar from the ground up, let's say. We never stopped production, but we changed production. And part of that was that in 2009, we implemented a very, at that time, now we could say forward-looking kind of approach of fully sustainable, fully organic, and really using that as our identity, which is why I use this kind of the very earth, sun, earth, tree, hands, as a full sustainability. And I bring you back to going back to the US, because that required us to probably also approach our distribution differently in the US. We were at the time when I moved to Italy with a very large, the largest distributor in the US, whose image wasn't exactly, and business wasn't exactly in line with what we wanted to comport to our new identity. So we had to change distribution, which is what I did while we were still in Italy. And then when we brought online the new cellar in 2011, by mid-2012, I came back to New York and started working with our new distributor, who was more of an artisan, small production, family kind of distributor who had national representation. And we rebuilt the distribution through them. At that time, our new ideas of marketing and discussing the sustainability aspects of the winery, which go beyond putting a solar panel out in the field or recycling water, but go into social and societal care and stability for our workers in our community, that went into energy use, that had to do with reducing the consumption of energy, not just changing the way you consume energy. Right. Waste management, all these kinds of things. We seem to be liked by certain people, but it still seemed to be very ahead in 2013, 14, and much less appreciated in the US than it was in Europe, let's say. In Europe, they were already very much of the interest of talking about these things in the U.S.
At that time.
At that time, and I said now it's very different. You know, life's about timing, and sometimes you know you're a little early and you have a different feeling. But at that time, the response in the U.S. was well, that's all great, but that's all happening in Italy. How does that affect us here in the U.S.? You know, and then it goes to discussion. It's one big bubble, and we all live in the same place. But you know, I tried to spare people for that. But it was very good for our distribution to move to someone who cared about the same things we did, because they did understand and they did kind of hand in glove with us to work on the same ideas. The pushback from the market was a little bit more surprising to us at the time, but it took time, but it finally did catch on. And the last 3-4 years have been a market change to see.
People really appreciate that aspect.
People appreciate it, and people are interested, and people are learning. Yeah.
Nice. And do you find in the U.S. that when you're kind of introducing the wine, how much market education do you need to do about Sangiovese, about your particular wines, or do you feel that people already know what you're talking about?
Well, overall, and Tuscany is obviously a known and brand name, and that's great. Montepulciano is a confusing name because of what we talked about, Vino Nobile, Montepulciano, and Montepulciano. That's where a lot of, in the first years, our education went into. There's been a change where we and many other producers in Montepulciano have gone to calling the wine Nobile rather than Vino Nobile de Montepulciano, and highlighting Tuscany rather than only Montepulciano. But Montepulciano is one of the 3 classic appellations of Tuscany, and it does still have appreciation, and people, once they learn about it, really do find it interesting. Sangiovese as a name has become more well known, and yes, you teach, but you say Chianti, and people, you know, the bulb lights up, and got it. And luckily, that's, and I don't know this, and I say luckily for me because I haven't lived through it, but Michele, if you talk to him, our winemaker, and who's, you know, we're similar age, but he's been involved in wineries since 1994. There was a time in the 80s and 90s that Chianti wasn't like it is today, meaning it wasn't well made, it was very commercial, and it was almost a negative in a way for quality and tasting.
Do you think it was seen as a cheap wine, or what was the? Yeah.
It was seen as cheap, and it was not cheap, but it was poorly made because it was an easy sell. So you just put something, you put a Chianti on it, but that's changed in the late 90s. The Consorzio and Chianti, it took a big step and made a lot of new regulations and controlled the production. And so for me, it's easy to say Chianti because people like Chianti and they appreciate it and they think it's a quality wine. So when I have to say Sangiovese, I say Sangiovese like Chianti. And so people, the bulb lights up.
To borrow from your tech world experience, you've got a number of buzzwords that you can throw around that orient people. You know, just to compare in terms of the Israeli wine scene, just because I wear multiple hats in terms of my involvement in the wine industry. I still like to promote the Israeli wine industry, and I know you do as well. Even though you're a partner in an Italian winery. You know, I think one of the issues, and that's one of the reasons why I pulled out the Argaman, one of the issues for Israel as a winemaking region is developing an identity in the world that will resonate with people, that will be able to say, you know, the name of a varietal, or will be able to say, you know, the name. You know, the whole issue of the appellations, and you and I have discussed it a little bit in the past. The whole idea of appellations within such a small country like Israel is very forced. Having said that, you can talk about the microclimates of the country and what varietals, you know, do better in different places. But I think it's still. I think we're still struggling. You know, I have my own viewpoints on it. We're still struggling to create our identity. So with my own winery, as you know, we've tried to focus on varietals where we think that some identity can get created, and we can coalesce around something. Which
I think you guys have done a very good job compared to many others.
Huh?
I think you've done a very good job compared to many others in that.
Well, but I think what's also happened is that, interestingly enough, in terms of the connection between much more Israel and Italy than, for example, Israel and France, I would say Israel and Italy and Israel and parts of Spain is, branding Israel as very much a Mediterranean, both from a cuisine, obviously, but Mediterranean style, Mediterranean wines, and trying to fall under that category. And that, I think, is starting to catch hold a little bit. So, for example, there's a marketing campaign out right now, which I don't know if I sent you any of the pieces of it, but the Wines of Israel, where the Mediterranean begins, which is trying to identify us as part of the Mediterranean basin of winemaking. And I think that, whether it's true or not, from a marketing point of view, seems to be working. It's a bit forced when you walk in, and I'm not saying this to at all denigrate the people who do some fine, Cab Merlot blends coming out of Israel, but it's a bit forced to say, I'm a Mediterranean wine, Mediterranean wines, and then walk in with your Cab, or Cabernet Franc, so I think that there's an interesting, conversation going around as to what Israeli wine, could mean once there's a lot of market education and people kind of develop a concept of that. I think we're far from it. We don't know where the conversation will take us, but we'll see.
I don't know where it will either, and I completely agree with your image. We've discussed it, that there seems to be a very strong ability to break away, or I'm not saying Cab and Merlot aren't good in Israel, but there's a way to do other things that relate to the Mediterranean, relate to the food. Something that's similar to Italian wine is the idea. And when you talk about the education and how it is when you go out to education, to do work on education here in the US, is Italian food has one very strong advantage over most, and very lucky, and that is Italian restaurants. As Michele likes to say, and now we have many philosophical discussions about what's the best food in the world, and he's not a best food, and he's not an Italian rah kind of person in the sense, but it says Italian must be the best food in the world. Why? And I go, well, it's a matter of taste. The thing in Hebrew, you can't tell that to people that the best food has to be. But he goes, look, I just take it from an empirical, statistical standpoint. Number one foreign food in the US is Italian. Number one foreign food in France is Italian. Number one foreign food in Japan is Italian. So it's not even regionally based. It's just the number one foreign food, non-local food. Yes. All that to say is that it's a great leg up, because I don't have to go educate in the US market, because 60% of the restaurants that we work with are Italian. So Italian food, they may or may not be Italian nationals in them, but they have an affinity and an automatic relationship. And I think that's something that can, and you see it, happily for me in New York, with the burgeoning population of Israeli restaurants, whatever that may mean. Exactly. But restaurants with Israeli connections, be it the chef or the food or the Middle-Terranean, as I've heard it called many times in the but that is a great ambassador for bringing in the wines and the food, and I think that's going to be a lot more impactful if you connect the two wineries and wine like yourselves, rather than, and I'm not saying that there aren't great cabs, rather than a cab XYZ.
Right. And I we're going to come to the end of our broadcast in a moment, but I think there's an interesting partnering, if you will, between Israeli wine and Italian restaurants that I have found, or greater acceptance of Israeli wine. When I say Israeli wine, again, I'm talking more from those that are choosing to make wine from varietals that can be classified as more Mediterranean, sun-loving, and have an acceptance or a greater acceptance in Italian restaurants than almost any other kind. Obviously, in restaurants that are being opened by Israeli chefs who are trying to have a Mediterranean twist in what they're doing, then then yeah, they want Israeli wine there as well. And again, they're looking for wines that they can say are distinctly Israeli, which is
and I'd have to say, I think distinctly Mediterranean. And I see it here. There often when these restaurants, there's a good amount of Israeli wine, there's a good amount of Lebanese wine, good amount of Greek wine. So it is more of, again, I don't want to say not, but like where your head's at of, it's Mediterranean, it's relatable to the cuisine, to the sun, to the lifestyle.
Yeah. Anyway, we got to wind up because it's late for me, and you have a whole day ahead of you. But
I definitely have homework to do with my daughter. That I know.
Go back to our Zoom homework meetings with our kids. But thank you for taking the time out. Obviously, most people will be watching us in reruns, which is just fine. And people who are more interested in Ron's winery, so you are urged. Ron, just what's the website of the winery? Let me
type it. Did you say type it in the chat? It's salcheto.it. Very simple. Salcheto.it.
So salcheto.it. That didn't work for some reason. But anyway, salcheto.it. I have to fix my technical issues. Salcheto.
Good information about the winery, the wines, when and if we can start getting around. We have a nice, what we call the wine house, which is a 6-room bed and breakfast on the winery property, connected to the cellar, to the facility. Beautiful place to visit when you can have some lunch and find all the information.
Yeah, so I greatly urge anybody who is thinking of a post-corona trip to Italy to look up the winery. It's a beautiful place. And by the way, and I will finish with this, Ron, you'll be very happy. Tell your partners at Salcheto that my favorite Zoom virtual background is a picture of your gravity,
light,
of that beautiful picture. That's become that's my go-to virtual background. So
I'll let Michele and Luca now.
Anyway, thanks everybody for listening, both in real time and in replay. And thank you to Ron and his family for allowing him to take time out during the day.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
Cheers.
Cheers, L'chaim.